Read any good books lately? Well, today I'll see if I might not interest you in a few as I take a look at American literature on postage stamps. More specifically, fiction writers, novelists, and short story writers and their works. Now, American fiction literature gets its start in 1789 with what is regarded as the first American novel, The Power of Sympathy by William Hill Brown, published in 1789. And if you look at the reviews on Goodreads.com, you may understand why he has not been immortalized on a U.S. postage stamp. Now, the first set of stamps ever issued to commemorate American authors was in 1940 with the Famous Americans set. Now, there were actually 7 separate sets of Famous Americans, and this first one was dedicated to writers and included 4 fiction writers. They were Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, Louisa May Alcott, and Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known as Mark Twain. Looking at them individually, Washington Irving published his first short story, Rip Van Winkle, in 1819, followed 1 year later by probably his most famous story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was depicted on a United States stamp in 1974, showing Ichabod Crane being chased by the Headless Horseman. Not far behind in publishing and honored in that same set was James Fenimore Cooper, who in 1823 published the first of his leather-stocking tales called The Pioneers. One of the other stories in that series was the classic Last of the Mohicans, which is depicted here on a set issued by the USSR in 1989. Also in the Famous American set are Louisa May Alcott, best known for her book Little Women, published in 1868. And then, of course, there's that titan of early American literature, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known by his pen name Mark Twain, and his best known works, the juvenile novel Tom Sawyer, published in 1876, and the book which laid the foundation for modern American literature, Huckleberry Finn, published in 1884. In 1832, the detective genre was created by none other than Edgar Allan Poe, with his publication of the story The Murders in the Rue Morgue. He also went on to write such diabolically spooky horror stories as The Cask of Amontillado, The Black Cat, and, of course, The Telltale Heart. His first stamp was issued in 1949, commemorating the 100th anniversary of his death. He got a second stamp in 2009, which commemorated the 200th anniversary of his birth. In 1982, the Postal Service issued this stamp commemorating Horatio Alger, a writer of stories for young boys, most notably the Ragged Dick series, which are a series of stories where the boys go from rags to riches due to their dedication, hard work, and persistence, and, of course, living a good moral life. In 1987, there was this issue for the story writer Bret Harte, known for his short stories in the Old West and gold mining camps and such. His most famous story is Luck of Roaring Camp, which was published in 1870. In 1881, Joel Chandler Harris published the first of his Uncle Remus stories, which were folk tales that you may be familiar with, the stories of Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox. In 1979, the Postal Service started a long-running series which continues to this day called Literary Arts. The latest stamp was issued in 2019, and the first one in 1979 was this one, issued for John Steinbeck, who is most noted for his novels The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men. That was followed in 1980 by this stamp for Edith Wharton, who made her mark writing about New York's upper-class aristocrats during the Gilded Age, the late 19th century of the U.S., with books such as The House of Mirth and Ethan Frome. And in 1921, Edith Wharton became the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for her novel The Age of Innocence. And by the way, that is the Pulitzer Prize, not the Pulitzer Prize, as many people like to pronounce it. The third stamp in the series came 3 years later for Nathaniel Hawthorne, most noted for his stories The Scarlet Letter and The House of Seven Gables. The next year we saw one for Herman Melville, who of course wrote that most famous opening line, "Call me Ishmael," for the book Moby Dick. In 1987, William Faulkner was honored on this stamp. And while there's no objective quantitative way to determine who's the greatest, there are those who do consider William Faulkner to be the greatest American author. He can also be found in this booklet from Sweden honoring Nobel Prize winners from 1985. Ernest Hemingway is also a Nobel Prize winner from 1954 for his body of work, which included Old Man and the Sea, The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, and a bunch of short stories. In 2010, Cuba issued a set for the Ernest Hemingway Fishing Tournament, which is held in Cuba each year. For 1992, the Postal Service issued this stamp for Dorothy Parker. Dorothy Parker wrote poetry, screenplays, critical essays, as well as 55 short stories. And then we come to the third member of the triumvirate of top American authors, F. Scott Fitzgerald, not to be confused with the photographer F. Stop Fitzgerald. He is, of course, known for his most popular work, The Great Gatsby, as well as other books such as Tender is the Night. Now, the literary arts series currently stands at 32 issues, including one for Ayn Rand, known for her books Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. And in 2003 came a stamp for Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote more than 50 short stories and 4 novels, her most popular being Their Eyes Were Watching God. And in 2009 came a stamp for Richard Wright, another African-American author who explored racial themes. His most notable book, Native Son, is what I'm currently reading. And in 2011, Mark Twain made an encore appearance on a U.S. postage stamp. In 1978, the Postal Service started another long continuing series called Black Heritage. It currently stands at 42 stamps through the year 2020, including this one for Langston Hughes, best known as a leader of the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s. His award-winning debut novel in 1930 was Not Without Laughter. And in 2008, Charles W. Chestnut was honored on a stamp. Chestnut was a lawyer and a political activist, best known for his novels and short stories. In 1899, his first book was published, a collection of short stories called The Conjure Woman. In 1986, a definitive series called The Great Americans began. It included this one for Margaret Mitchell, the author of one of the all-time best-selling books, Gone with the Wind, which was also featured on a stamp in 1998. 2012 marked the centennial year of the publication of Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. The book was an instant success, and it spawned 23 more books in the series. With the money he earned from the books, Burroughs moved to California and bought a large ranch, which he named Tarzana Ranch. When the community that sprang up around the ranch became an incorporated city in 1927, the residents voted to name the city Tarzana. 4 classic children's books were commemorated in a set of stamps issued in 1993. They were Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, Little House on the Prairie, Huckleberry Finn, and Little Women. Now, we've seen a couple of foreign stamps already commemorating American literature. Another one comes from Antigua and Barbuda, who in 2000 issued this one for Eudora Welty. Toni Morrison has been honored a couple of times on foreign postage stamps, once in 2000 by Palau, and before that in 1993 with this stamp from Sweden. In 1998, San Marino issued a sheet of 16 stamps honoring science fiction writers, 8 of them being Americans, and each stamp depicting one book by that author. There's Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, Frederick Poole and C.M. Kornbluth's Space Merchants, and Robert Sheckley's The Seventh Victim. And if you're wondering why the book shown is actually titled The 10th Victim, that's because The Seventh Victim was originally a short story. The Italians made a movie out of the story, but titled it The 10th Victim. Robert Sheckley then novelized the movie and kept that title, The 10th Victim. Then there's Isaac Asimov's Foundation, Frank Herbert's Dune, Clifford D. Seamak's City, and Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, better known to film buffs as Blade Runner. And finally, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. And speaking of Ray Bradbury, I'm rather upset with our U.S. Postal Service for completely ignoring Ray Bradbury last year in 2020 on the centennial of Bradbury's birth. So, to make up for that deficit, this is a stamp I've created. Now, perhaps my favorite stamps for this topical collection are not actual postage stamps at all, but fantasy issues created by the mystery and crime writer Lawrence Block. Here's my Lawrence Block collection here, and in this book, Hit Me. It's part of a series featuring a hitman named Keller. And Keller, as is Lawrence Block, is a stamp collector. And with the proceeds from each hit job that he does, he goes out and purchases a expensive stamp. Now in this book, Lawrence Block has included 2 souvenir sheets that feature stamps from the Keller collection. There are 2 sheets. One is a mint copy, if you can call a bullet-ridden souvenir sheet mint, and this canceled copy, which you can see is canceled Keller. Rest in peace. In addition, on the title page, there is a personalized Zazzle stamp that's been affixed to the page, and that is an actual stamp. It's not printed on. And as you can see, this book was part of a limited run of 500 copies. So there are 500 pairs of souvenir sheets available. So that does it for another episode of TED Talk Stamps. I hope you enjoyed this brief survey of American literature on stamps. And if you know of any other foreign stamps that feature American literature on them, please let me know in the comments below. So until next time, this is Ted, the Talking Stamp Collector, reminding you to... Well, if you remember it, remind me, all right? We'll see you next time.